the plan. Oh, okay. I'd like to call to order the Planning Commission meeting of July 27th. As everybody knows, we're still doing remote. And so if you want to be an attendee, you'll be a guest. And in order to be heard, you need to raise your hand. There's also a number to call in on the agenda. And if you're having trouble, there's also an email address. I'd like to ask either Neil or Kristen for the roll call.
Okay, I'll start from my top to bottom. Chairman Wagstaff.
Here.
Commissioner Tauber.
Here.
Commissioner Chalmers.
Yeah.
Commissioner Deignan. Commissioner Deignan, you were here. Are you here?
Deignan.
Who's that?
Sorry, I'm sorry. Commissioner Kumpler.
I am here.
I've been there too long.
Boy.
And as from what I can tell, we still do not have Commissioner.
Commissioner Swisher, I think, thinks he is recused from the first item. So do you need him to call in and then recuse himself, or can he just call in after the first item?
That's fine. He can call in after the first item.
Okay, let me let him know.
Okay.
I will indicate Commissioner Swisher reported that he is not attending as he's recusing himself from the first item.
Thank you, Neil. I'd like to ask if anybody in the audience would like to speak on matters not on the agenda. You see anybody raising their hand? If not, I'd like to ask for the planning director's report.
Okay, just a brief report today. The city council meeting of August 4th has been canceled, and they'll be resuming their next meeting, their second meeting in August on the 18th. Other matters, we continue to recruit for the associate planner position. As I've reported, it has been challenging to find quality candidates in that type of sort of a journeyman planner position, a position typically that has some definite experience, certainly training and experience. A position we're hoping could come in and really hit the ground running. And just finding kind of the right fit has been challenging. So we continue to recruit that, and we've put the recruitment closure date towards the end of August. I think it was the 23rd. So we'll see by the end of this month how many candidates we have for that position. And then you probably did note in the Marin IJ recently there is a report regarding the project by the state. They declared a portion of the property, the San Quentin property, about a 5-acre portion, to be surplus land, and by a governor's order has put out an RFP and selected a developer, a combination of Eden Housing and another company to initiate a project. They're looking to develop up to 230 units on the site. We have had some discussions with them on that project, and we'll keep you apprised as that proceeds, and probably provide some reporting on it. It is a state project. The state is looking to fully entitle the project on their own. The property currently is within the county jurisdiction, but is within Larkspur's sphere of influence. So we both have some interest in the development. So again, we'll keep the commission apprised of progress on that. And I do see, for the record, Commissioner Swisher has shown up and is now attending on the meeting.
And I wanted to apologize. I thought since I need to recuse myself from the first one, I was going to sign in after you finish the first one. But I'm here now and I will do that.
And the other, well, I'll be talking a bit about the housing element requirements and program later this evening, sort of beginning an introduction on that process for the Planning Commission. And in other news, we're working on some updates to the general plan, to the draft EIR, in order to get that out and circulated and begin the process for the general plan update. So I hope to have some solid dates for you and timelines for you by our next meeting on that. Do you have any questions of staff?
Any questions? Seeing none, I will move on to, there are no consent items, so we'll go to the first public hearing item, which is 211579 Ardmore Road. And I would ask Lorraine to give the planning rundown on this project.
Good evening, Chair Wagstaff and members of the commission. The applicants are requesting permits to allow residential renovation of an existing two-story residence, including a two-story addition at the rear of the home, totaling 2,202 square feet, demolition of the existing pool and construction of a new swimming pool, and landscape improvements on an existing 23,062 square foot parcel. The subject site was originally two parcels that have been recently merged. The site has an average grade of 19% and it's located in the South Magnolia neighborhood. The property front on Ardmore Road is a downsloping from the street and has approximately 10 to 15 feet of unimproved roadway. The home was originally constructed in 1967 and totals 3,198 square feet. There's a 32 square foot wood shed attached to the northerly building elevation and a deck with steps at the rear of the house, which provides access to the backyard. In addition, there is a detached 85 square foot wood accessory structure located between the existing pool and the rear lawn area on parcel 2. The streetscape in front of these properties in the area generally include fences in the unimproved portion of the Arbors Avenue public right-of-way. In terms of the proposed project, I'm just going to highlight some things because I'm sure the architect will go into it in more detail. As we mentioned, they're proposing to construct a two-story addition, which totals 2,200 square feet at the rear of the existing house for a total of 5,400 square feet. The scope of work also includes extensive site improvements, including demolition of the existing pool and construction of a new relocated pool and some landscaping. At the lower level, the addition would extend to the rear of the house 33 feet and 11 inches in depth and add an office, family room, powder room, and stairs. On the upper level, the addition would extend the floor to the rear of the home and add a kitchen, pantry, mudroom, and stairs. Both floors of the addition would be flush to the building edge. They'll be recessed in front of the south building edge, approximately 15 feet and 3 inches, and further recessed from this addition by approximately 23 feet. The north side of the home would expand beyond the building edge by 2 feet and 10 inches. I'm going to go over just a few of the site improvements. There would be a new 6-foot-high wood fence with horizontal planks painted gray on a concrete curb along the front or west property line and a gate at the front property line. There would also be new artificial turf. There would be a 3-foot 6-inch guardrail fence behind the turf area near the front yard. The new swimming pool would be approximately 40 feet wide by 16 feet deep. These are the interior dimensions, and would include an 8-foot wide by 6-foot deep spa. There will be a 6-foot-high redwood fence on the rear property line. In terms of the house, the roof of the residence would have 3 peaked roof portions with a roof pitch of 4.5 to 12 to match the existing structure. The materials would differ for the existing structure and the proposed addition. The proposed building height would measure 24 feet and 1¼ inches at the highest point, measured from natural grade to roof peak. The proposed addition would increase the floor area from 3,198 square feet and a 0.14 FAR to 5,400 square feet and a 0.23 FAR, where 0.31 is permitted due to the slope of the lot. The existing residential structure complies with lot coverage, height limits, and natural state. In terms of the landscape renovation, much of the existing landscaping and some trees will be removed. New vegetation, trees, and planting areas would be proposed throughout the rear and side yards, and a new patio area and pavers surrounding the pool, stone patio at the rear of the house, lawn at the rear of the pool, and pathways at the side yards. 24 existing trees are proposed for removal. 21 existing mature trees with large canopies would remain, including one 32-inch heritage oak tree. 36 new trees are proposed to be planted. The story poles have been installed per the story pole plan on sheet A2.3. In terms of the design review, staff finds that the design presents modest additions to the residence that are well placed on the site, would be in scale with the existing home, and allow the home to remain compatible with other residences in the neighborhood. The streetscape and yards on the site and adjacent properties are vegetated with plantings intended to screen views of each other. The proposed first and second story addition is designed to be minimally visible from the street frontage and adjacent properties and would be set back 18 feet 11 inches from the home to the rear property line. The addition is proposed to be set back approximately 75 feet from the south side property line and approximately 109 feet from the north side property line, which provides ample distance between the new addition and adjoining properties. Given the scale and placement of the addition at the rear of the house on the parcel and the heavily vegetated rear yard, it's not anticipated to impact the surrounding neighbors and will ensure a home that is compatible and would be complementary to the architectural and aesthetic character of the neighborhood. In terms of the slope use permit, the house expansion requires a slope use permit because the plans include a combined 554 cubic yards of earth, including 222 cubic yards of cut and 332 cubic yards of fill on the 19% sloped lot. Proposed site grading is modest for the size of the property and modifies the existing site condition and topography, though not significantly. The building pad location is relatively open, avoiding significant tree cover, and requires the removal of only one plum tree that's 38 inches in circumference. While a total of 24 existing trees are proposed for removal, 21 existing trees will be preserved on this vegetated hillside. The grading quantities proposed for development of the site are modest, and combined with the minimal building area is found to be consistent with the intent and purpose of the slope and hillside regulations, which state that this design should preserve the significant features of sloping and elevated hill area in essentially their natural state. The city engineer has reviewed the plans, the geotechnical reports, the grading and drainage plans, and is satisfied that the design is feasible and can be accomplished in compliance with applicable conditions of approval that would be imposed at the building permit stage if the project is approved. An encroachment license agreement for the proposed private improvements, which would be the fence and steps within the public right-of-way along the Ardmore Road frontage, will be required prior to issuance of the building permit. This would be condition number 19. The fire department has reviewed the plans. The project is in the wildland urban interface zone and is required to comply with defensible space requirements, fire-resistant provisions that are set forth in the California Residential Code, and to install fire sprinklers. In terms of the fence height exception, there is a 6-foot-high wood fence proposed along the front property line, as stated earlier. within the front yard setback and is 11 feet back of the improved roadway along Ardmore Road. The maximum fence height along the front property line is 42 inches. The materials and design of the fence is generally compatible with those in the neighborhood. Due to the location of the front fence in the front yard, which is set back 11 feet from the roadway and structures on the site and adjacent lots, the proposed fence will not impact access to light and air for the subject property and neighboring properties. The fence would not block significant views. The neighborhood is characterized by a range of front fences in front and street side yards. In terms of the heritage tree removal, there are 2 trees proposed for removal, including a 113-inch poplar tree, tree number 1, and an 88-inch California bay laurel, tree number 5, due to their locations. Additional trees are proposed for removal, though they are not protected trees. So based on city practice, tree replacements for trees 79 inches in circumference or greater would be a 4-to-1 tree replacement value. Tree number 1 is 113 inches in circumference. Tree number 5 is 88 inches in circumference. As noted earlier, 36 trees are proposed to be planted. These are all going to be 24-inch box-sized trees, and the trees would be planted throughout the site. The number of trees exceeds the amount of replacement value. The project arborist has indicated that tree number 1 has normal vitality and structural integrity with no apparent problems. However, due to its location adjacent to the driveway and drain inlet with invasive roots, staff supports the requested tree removal permit. And the second tree, tree number 5, the project arborist has indicated it also has low vitality and structural integrity, and room is needed to create defensible space, so staff supports the requested tree removal permit. In addition, the fire marshal requires that pyrophytic trees and trees in close proximity to the house be removed. The poplar tree is very close to the roadway and driveway by the north property line and poses a hazard to the drainage system. The California bay laurel is located on the southeast corner, and proposed for removal is desired to reduce the fire hazard and create more defensible space for fire safety. The removal of these trees are supported by the fire marshal as part of the vegetative management plan. A landscape tree inspection report was prepared, and the trees are shown on page 1 of the project plans. I'm sorry, page L1 of the project plans. In terms of public comment, staff received 4 written public comments after preparation of the staff report. 3 of these provided support of the project, and the last one, which was forwarded to you today, was in opposition due to some general concerns about construction management and how it would be handled along Ardmore Road. This individual's view of the 3 roofs rather than one at the subject site, and a concern for noise in the front area, given where the artificial church is located. Staff recommends the project is consistent with the required findings of approval for design review, slope use permit, fence height exception, and the heritage tree removal. And if Planning Commission decides to approve the application tonight, in the staff report, you'll find the findings and conditions of approval. The staff recommends approval, and I'd be happy to answer any questions of the commission.
Does anybody have any questions for Lorraine? Lorraine, it calls out for cedar shingles and various painted wood shingles. I presume these are all treated given the WUI zone requirements.
That is my understanding, yes.
Okay. I didn't see it anywhere, but we'll assume that's the case. Anybody else have any questions? Okay, thank you. I would like to ask either the applicant or the architect or both if they would like to make a presentation.
If the applicant or architect could raise their hand, I will unmute you. Barbara Chambers.
Okay. Am I on?
You are on, Barbara.
Okay, I don't see my image, but that's okay, right?
What's your name?
Pardon me? Oh, just my name. It says city clerk.
Oh.
So I suppose you can see me, but anyway, am I supposed to do something? This is an unusual format.
If you just want to make a presentation of what the sort of thinking was, if you feel you need.
Oh yeah, no, I can do that. I was just, I'm unfamiliar. Usually there's a lot of people on it and you can sort of, anyway, I'll just go ahead and do the presentation. But, and I guess if we could just, Lorraine, if you could go to sheet A1.1, that would be great. And we can just stay on that sheet. I think that would be easiest. So good evening, Planning Commission. Thank you very much for reviewing our final design review approval. We're pleased to present our proposal for an existing remodel to a 2-story residence, a 2-story addition to the existing home, demolition of existing pool, and significant landscape improvements to this beautiful site located in Larkspur. The original home is 3,200 square feet and needs remodeling. At the same time, our clients desired more floor space for their growing family. Our desire was to integrate a well-placed downslope addition to this residence while linking the house more fully to the recently merged parcels, making the indoor and outdoor lifestyle we enjoy in California seamless. The site is large, downslope, and approximately 23,000 square feet. We decided on a downslope addition to the home really early in the process because I felt it would have the most minimal impact to the site as well as to the adjacent neighbors. And I think we've done that. We are reusing the current driveway in the garage location, and generally the interior configuration of the current residence remains very similar. And we wanted to preserve that. And I think that's a nice thing that we could do that instead of tearing down the entire house. So the new addition has a 9-foot plate, very reasonable, and a very low pitched roof to match the existing, which is 4.5 and 12. We meet all the setback and FAR requirements set forth by the town. In addition, we are in substantial conformance to the town's guidelines for building design. The project is designed around 2 easements that are shown on the site plan. The proposed dark shingled earth tone colors of the existing home, most clearly seen from the street facade, very intentionally contrasts with the newly built addition, generally unseen from the street facade. The change in materials and color helps to break down the scale or massing of the residence as we desired. And I think we've achieved that goal. The building forms will fit into the natural setting and the topography of this particular site. The proposed massing, materials, and overall design intent were meant to blend and complement the natural downslope features of the property. The addition is compatible with other homes and the pattern of development in this particular neighborhood. The remodel and addition create no significant impacts to neighboring privacy or views. As you can see, the roofs of the additions are very well hidden behind the main house, and they're essentially the same height. The landscape improvements also complement the natural topography. Jim Brettadini, our landscape architect, will discuss this in a little more detail. And we also have our civil engineer, Dan Hughes, here to answer any questions about civil or any drainage issues that you may have, which we've spent a good deal of time addressing and resolving those issues. I'd be happy to address any further comments or questions. And thank you so much for your consideration this evening. And thank you, staff, for your support of the project. We really appreciate it. I'm Barbara Chambers, representing Chambers and Chambers. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions for Barbara Chambers?
Yeah, I do. I've got a couple. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so thank you for your presentation. I did notice on page 834, and of course it's pretty obvious from the illustrations, they use two different roof types. You've got the composite roof, and then you're using a seam metal roof.
Mhm.
I think you kind of implicitly mentioned why that was in order to create some kind of a contrast between the two parts of the home. But I don't know if there's anything you can add with regard to your thinking behind having two different roof types.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about that a little bit. It was very intentional to sort of keep the fabric of the existing house. It's sort of long and linear. We didn't want to change that. And then to really break down that massing and present a new addition to the house that's compatible, yet a little bit, modernized and distinctly different. And so that massing would really break itself down naturally. I chose to select different materials for the addition. And I actually personally really like that. I think it says something very nice about old and new. And I don't think it'd be as successful if we were just to continue. Of course, we could continue the shingles and the shake roof all the way around, but I just don't think it would be as successful personally. And I don't know, I've been doing this a long time and it just feels like the right thing to do, but I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Yeah, so, I understand. It's an aesthetic choice. At the same time, this is a large home by any kind of absolute tally, and you're certainly within the numerical guidelines for the property.
Mhm.
And there's nothing in the city ordinances that would in fact allow us to have a condition of approval such as solar. However, I do find myself wondering if solar is in the cards for this property, given that the larger properties do have a higher carbon footprint,
Mhm.
and there is a general plan for the city that does have an environmental element to it. And I was wondering if that's something you would consider accommodating.
I would certainly consider that. I would like my clients perhaps to address that. We haven't gotten to that point in the project, but I'm sure they'd be happy to address that now if you'd allow them to speak a little bit.
I'd love to hear from them.
Okay. Noel?
Well, I'll allow the chair to sort of determine the sequence.
I think before we do that, let's see if anybody else has any other questions for Barbara relative to the architecture. Anybody else? So why don't you have the clients also speak, and you'll be there if we need to get back to you with a few questions.
Sure, of course.
Okay.
And Alton Lowe, you've been unmuted.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, so yeah, this is Alton speaking. My wife Noelle is with me as well. And certainly being environmentally friendly and green are very important to us. In fact, I used to work in the renewable energy industry for a little while. So solar is absolutely part of our plan, both to power the pool and as much of the home as needed. And then the other thing we're trying to do is actually to have like a gray water plan, where either kind of runoff, et cetera, can be accumulated somewhere, on the property that could be used for irrigation to try and, be as green as possible in these current drought-ridden type conditions. And so, so absolutely yes to solar. It's something we plan or would love to do, as well as I think we want as kind of drought tolerant and water conserving a project as possible.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for either Alton or Barbara? Barbara, are you still there?
Yes,
So I have a question, or a couple of questions or thoughts. There are definitely two totally different kinds of architecture going on. And I presume from what you said that this was on purpose, including roofs that really don't meld together. They are just standalones. So you've got the old house, and then you have really the new addition. And I just want to sort of hear your thinking on this, because I'm trying to to work with, I mean, I like modern architecture and lots of different kinds, and I'm trying to understand where you were coming from on this particular one.
Well, I think I addressed that a little bit in my comments before, but I think basically I wanted the three pieces, which are the old house, the circulation, and then the new house, to really express themselves as separate volumes. And it also led to us, instead of taking the roof of the existing house and taking it up until it comes up to a point and then taking it back down, it allowed for a lesser massing in those three forms. But I think beyond that, I really felt strong about just expressing the three different volumes, being the three different really uses or three different parts of the building. And I just wanted to express those sort of honestly as architectural forms.
Okay. I appreciate that approach. I guess, does anybody else have any questions? I think that's, thank you very much, Barbara. And I guess we would ask if there's anybody in the audience who would also like to speak to this.
Thank you. Our first comment will come from Weller Design.
Hi, this is Sherry Weller. And I am the person that wrote the letter to the commission. I also am the homeowner directly across the street from the property. And I really appreciate that the addition is sited more to the rear. That is great, but there are some issues that I brought up in the letter. I'm not going to go through and read the letter. However, some are a little more important to me as the adjacent homeowner. And I guess firstly, I did want to, as a trained architect, I also want to bring up the three roofs, the three buildings, the three different materials. That is not really seen in this neighborhood as far as I know. I've been here 26 years, and I don't believe that the three different types of roofs or buildings are actually complementary to the neighborhood. And also, I do see the three roofs from my living areas, and now I see one roof. I don't see that much of it, but what I am concerned about a little bit more even is that the owners had originally wanted a sport court right off of the street. Now it is in the exact same place as what is called an artificial lawn that has a fence, a gate, and lighting. Now this is really gives me pause, because artificial turf does not require a fence or lighting. And what I see is that this will become a place where there may be a lot of noise from kids at night, or people at night, or just a lot of noise that is going to literally waft up into my house. The thing that's really missing here for me is an actual study of the sight lines from my house, being that I am directly above this house, the sight lines looking into their new property, their backyard. They are removing the poplar. I'm actually very happy about that, but I have to say that does provide some screening, and 24-gallon box trees do not and will not for another 10 years. So I am very concerned about the screening, and I think the owners should be too. The screening from their yard to my site out on my balcony or in my living area. I'm also concerned about the lighting, number one, in the artificial lawn area out on the street. We actually have a big street light right in front, unfortunately, in front of my house, but it does light that entire area. So I think the landscape designer, well, I think they actually did a fantastic job on the landscape, probably have a little too much light at the street side, because we would like to maintain kind of a small street feeling and be able to see stars if at all possible. So going into my concerns, I'm very concerned about that there was never a sightline study done from the one property mine that looks right down on the property, which would maybe, impact my privacy as well as the new owner's privacy. And one of the things that I also see from my living areas are the three roofs. And while I may personally architecturally think that three roofs do not actually break down the massing naturally, it would be really nice if they could be a little bit shallower or lower on the site so that I could maintain my sight line. The other thing that I'm very concerned about that I have not seen in this condition approval is the handling of all of the construction. As you know, or if you don't know, well, Brock Wagstaff, you probably know because I'm in your uncle's house. So I'm right, probably know this street very well, probably the best of anyone on the commission. But this street is very small, and the impact of the trucks, the dirt, the noise, the dust, the parking, the vibration from all of the retaining walls. I'd like to know exactly how that's going to be planned, how we're going to have through traffic, any kind of mitigation measures. I have a retaining wall on the street. I happen to have the only 5-car parking area on the street. So all the trucks may want to park right in front of my house, and they may impact my retaining wall as well as my tree. So I think that may be it. The artificial lawn that really is a sports court by any other name is very disturbing, because no one needs an artificial lawn with lights and a fence and a gate. The screening between my property and theirs is of extreme importance, probably for both of us. And the pattern of development in this neighborhood, unfortunately, has been very mixed matched, nothing that I would write home about. So I think that something that would enhance the neighborhood would be more in keeping with what the homeowners would actually be looking for. So I went more into this in my letter, but I don't think anybody really wants me to go into this. But I have issues with the design, the confused and generally unaesthetic approach, the roofs. I think the landscape design is actually totally beautiful. I love it. But I'm going to be able to see it. So please describe how you're going to, provide a sightline study, provide more screening buffer. What exactly is the meaning of the artificial turf? Please look a little bit better, closer at patterns of development in the neighborhood, and massing breaking down naturally doesn't happen. So the use of horizontal, vertical, and shingles, maybe in a project that has, 50,000 more square feet makes a lot of sense, but this is actually pretty small property to put three different architectural materials on it. And there's not enough difference for the actual massing or the use to stand out. I'm done.
I was muted, sorry. Thank you for your comments. I appreciate them. And I'm glad you live in my uncle's house. Does anybody else have any thing to add? Is there any other hands up?
Looking for any additional raised hands in our audience members. And there's no further public comment.
Okay, seeing no further public comment, I would like to bring it back to the commission. And I think I'll start with Natasha. Your thoughts on the project?
Thank you, Brock. So I had my thoughts on the project based on my site visit and reviewing of the paperwork, and then I guess I have some additional thoughts now, hearing what the other commissioners have to say and what the neighbor had to say. So I'm just kind of rethinking my thoughts a little bit here, so bear with me. You know what I think I might do is just see if I can address some of the comments that I think it was Miss Weller just raised right now, because I think it's good that their neighbors speak up, and we want to make sure that they're heard. I think with the handling of construction, there's in the staff report number 17, I don't know if that's visible to the applicants, but there is a section that addresses how there's a construction management plan. So maybe the staff needs to talk to Ms. Weller about that, but it looks like there is an established plan about that, right, Lorraine?
That's correct. So condition number 17 would require the applicant to submit a detailed construction management plan. And the condition calls out all the different items that we would ask for, including estimated project duration, construction schedule with milestones, including excavation, grading, and off-haul duration, foundation work, framing, flat work, paving, punch list, final inspections, how excavation and disposal will be handled, the equipment to be used, site access location, the storage and staging locations of materials and equipment, truck loading area and temporary traffic control as necessary, the haul route, and the requirement that earthwork between October 15th and April 15th, an action plan for stormwater pollution prevented, erosion and sediment control prior to anticipated rain event. So there's a lot of details that have to be worked out, and these items would be worked out prior to issuance of the first building permit. So
Right.
These are things that aren't necessarily all determined yet at this point, but they would before the first permit would be issued.
Thank you, Lorraine. So I hope that addresses the concerns raised by Ms. Weller. She also raised noise from the artificial lawn, whether that would be a sports playing field. We can have the applicant talk to that, but I think, I don't know if they have children or not, but I think a lawn would be really fun to have, and it wouldn't necessarily, the shape that I'm looking at, it doesn't look like a sports court. So maybe we can come back to that. And then I think the other comment she had was light and a sightline study. So I will probably defer again to the applicant and my fellow commissioners on whether there's a solution to not having too much light on the street. But on the other hand, I think having light maybe shouldn't be too much of an issue. And then a question for the staff was, Ms. Weller also asked about a sightline study. I don't know if that's a requirement or not.
Hi, this is Kristen, the senior planner. As a rule, no, we don't do sightline studies that evaluate the roof lines and things they're looking at. The only time we really step up our game regarding lines of sight is if it looks like somebody's losing a significant view, meaning that it's blocking their view of the hillsides beyond, of the waterway, of stands of notable trees, of the mountain. We try to ensure that historic views that are significant are preserved, but that was not determined to be the case with this project, so we did not take it further.
That's very helpful. Oh, go ahead, Rob.
I think story poles are basically erected so that if you want to bring up sightline issues, you can as you see them. So anyway.
Super, that's very helpful. So hopefully that addresses some of the concerns raised by the neighbor. And then just, I guess, back to my own thoughts on this. I am actually not an architect, and I didn't really have that much of a concern on the two different types of style. I thought Brock's comments were very interesting, and I look forward to hearing kind of the comments from the commissioners tonight on that. So, but my kind of view was these are, I mean, this is not really viewed from, it's not viewed from the street. And I thought generally as a standalone project, it was compatible and has minimal impact again from the distance from the street and the neighboring properties. So I actually was okay with the design. And I did actually like hearing about the applicant's environmental plans tonight. That was very encouraging. And then regarding the other three requirements that they're applying for, the slope use permit, fence and heritage tree removal, I think the findings for the slope use permit have been met with respect to safety requirements and considering the environmental characteristics in the report. On the fence height exception, normally I don't like tall fences located in a setback, especially at the front of a property. But in this case, I believe the slope of the hillside just removes the impact of the height and therefore the openness of the view from the street. And then finally, on the heritage tree removal, I'm sure we're going to get some mixed reviews on the poplar tree, but I have to say that when I arrived for the site visit, I immediately noticed that poplar tree at the front of the property, and I was actually quite sad to see that there was an application for its removal. So I'm not sure how real or high the risk is to drainage. That was what was mentioned in the report. It doesn't seem to interfere with any of the additions on the property. So I would love to see the owners finding a way to keep it, but I do hear that they are planting new trees in excess of the 4:1 ratio. So I want to kind of bear that in mind when I make my final decision. So those are kind of my general comments, and I look forward to hearing what the others have to say on the architecture on this property.
Thank you, Natasha. I would ask Laura to speak next on her thoughts. You there?
She's not unmuted.
I'm okay. Now can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
I'll just go through the requests. So design review. I actually think the three styles is kind of interesting. And the truth of the matter is that you can't really see it. So that the beneficiaries really of the way it looks and feels is the owner. Because I don't think you can really see it from the street or even from the side because of the way the slope is and the way that the house sort of goes down into the site. So I think I'm okay with design review. Slope use permit makes sense to me. It's a lot of it's for the pool. that they're redesigning and sort of modernizing, and I think that the landscape plan is very attractive. Fence height exception makes a lot of sense. There was one drawing where it sort of shows that the effective fence height is like 3 feet, something like that, you know, from the street. So even though the fence is that high, when you put it in at a downslope, it doesn't have the effect of seeming that high. And in terms of the heritage tree removal, it is sad to lose big trees. And I guess if it's possible to save that poplar tree, that would be nice. But I also am not going to say no for the request to remove the trees to be able to build the rest of the project. So I'm generally in favor of the project.
Thank you. Commissioner Kunstler.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Brock, and thanks to Laura and to Natasha for making my job a whole lot easier, because a lot of what I'm going to say sort of echoes what they have said. We never make light of objections or questions on that come from the neighbors. So I definitely understand why Ms. Weller made the comments that she did. I would say that as Natasha explained, a lot of those concerns, I believe, are being mitigated. Not the least of those mitigations is a very elaborate landscaping and very attractive landscaping plan. Probably a lot more attractive than what currently exists on the property. With regard to the artificial turf, again, as Natasha said, it's not obvious that that's actually functionally a sports court or anything else specific. So if that was a basketball court or I don't know, an amphitheater or something like that, where that was single use and would per se generate quite a bit of disturbance or noise, that would be one thing. But here it was sort of to sort of make that determination here would be highly speculative, and as a commission, that's simply not our job to regulate someone's behavior. That's not what we're here to do. So combining all of that together and the overall design choices, I think I can make the finding for an appropriate design proposal here. I did have a little bit of pause with regard to the different roof materials. That probably reflects sort of a lack of precedent that I have not observed. So it's something. It is somewhat novel. But I understand why the architect made the choices that she did, and I think, as I think Laura said, that it does actually add some interest, and particularly when you're looking at something which is downslope. I don't think that design choice will be particularly obtrusive. I do appreciate the commitment to solar that the applicants have made. I do want to clarify one thing that I said before, is that we can't put in a condition of approval. I would just maybe modify that a little bit. We can't arbitrarily put in a condition of approval such as that. The city ordinances simply do not permit us to do that. If a design is pushing the envelope, particularly with regard to variances, well, that might be a different story, where we say, well, we can mitigate some of our hesitation on approval if you add this environmental feature, but that's not the case here. They're definitely not pushing the envelope with regard to design. Slope use permit, I really don't have anything to add to what Laura and Natasha have said. And same thing, the fence height. Actually, the 6-foot fence in this particular circumstance, I think actually makes a lot of sense because of the downslope. It doesn't really present as a 6-foot fence. And if I were in their shoes, I would probably want a fence of that height in that position as well, given the wildlife which is around the area. And heritage tree removal, I'm also, saddened by the removal of the poplar, but I don't really want to second guess the determination of the staff and the various experts, including the fire marshal, with regard to the impact on the drainage. So I think I can see my way clear to that. So overall, I think I can see my way clear to making the findings.
Thank you, Daniel. So I guess I'm the last man standing, as it were. I can probably make the findings for this. I think there are some missed opportunities to modernize the house, and to embrace the fact that it's a big footprint environmentally, and I'm glad they are doing solar. I think that will help. But the decisions were made, design decisions were made, and it's between the architect and the client at this point. So I think I can make the findings for the design review. The fence is down the slope. I don't have a problem with the 6-foot fence. And the poplar tree, I grew up with poplar trees. They do have a lifespan. That one is pretty big. So, who knows how long it would stay there. And I think I can understand why they would want to take it out. So with that said, would somebody like to make a motion?
Okay, I'll move for approval of design review, slope use permit, fence height exception, and heritage tree removal, number 21-15 for 79 Ardmore Road.
I'll second.
And that, of course, is subject to the conditions of approval.
Right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? There is a 10-day appeal period, and thank you for everybody that showed up and spoke. So we will go on to the second item and hopefully bring Jeffrey back, wherever he is.
Oh, I'm here. I just muted myself, but I'm here.
Okay. So the second item is 224 Hawthorne Avenue. And Kristen, can we have the staff report on that?
Yes. Before I begin, I just want to bring everyone's attention, because I see some of the individuals who filed these letters are in the audience, that I provided the commission with a grouping of late mails over the last few days. One is an email from 220 Hawthorne. The second was a January 2021 letter from 220 Hawthorne that he asked me to provide you. And the third is a new letter that he asked me to provide you. And then I also forwarded a series of pictures for everyone to see that demonstrate the narrowness between some of these homes and other things. We also had a late mail from the owners of 125 Locust and a late email from the owners of 230 Hawthorne. All of those were also forwarded to the applicant and their representation. And I have them here if anyone wants to see them. They're all combined together. These are the plans. Where are my plans? I think I've lost my plans. I'll have to pull them up, but let's go back to the picture here for the applicant. So the application before you is a request to demolish the existing dilapidated structure on this site, clear the site and complete some grading and site work, and construct a new 2-story single-family home with landscaping. Permits required include design review, a floor area ratio exception for a 2,127 square foot home with a 0.42 FAR where 1,484 square feet and a 0.29 FAR is permitted due to the slope of the lot. For those who aren't familiar, the slope reduces the permitted floor area from 0.40 down. They also need a variance to the parking standards because a new single family home is supposed to provide a minimum of 4 on-site parking spaces. 1 has to be covered. And a heritage tree removal permit to remove 4 trees, a Canary Island palm, 2 coast live oaks, and 1 Monterey pine. The subject site's a 5,121 square foot lot measuring 37.5 feet in width with an average grade of 21%. The commission probably noted when you were there that there's a large section of unimproved right-of-way fronting this property that makes the front yard look much larger. The proposed home is at the 20-foot setback, but there's about 20 feet of right-of-way as well. So there's 40 feet from the roadway. The proposed residence would maintain a similar placement on the lot as the existing building footprint with some expansion, including a second story. The exterior materials include fiber cement, smooth horizontal siding painted white, fiberglass windows and doors finished in black, charcoal colored composition shingles and gray fencing and deck railings. Staff determined the residence would generally comply with all zoning regulations, including the side yard setbacks, the front yard. It exceeds the rear yard. It meets the height limits. It does not meet the FAR limit. It does exceed it, and it does only have 3 on-site parking spaces. They also propose grading of 94 cubic yards to sort of set the house down into the site a little better and maintain sight lines and views for the neighbors. And this will require installation of some small low retaining walls. Generally, staff finds the architectural design, building height, and proposed finishes to be modest and compatible with the prevailing neighborhood character. This neighborhood is notable for having sort of an eclectic range of architectural styles like the previous, some of which are fairly bulky and prominent on the hillsides all around this lot. The placement of the home is centered on the lot and would be forward of 230 Hawthorne and maintain its existing historic views at their rear and side windows. And additionally, it lines up with the home below at 220, which has no significant windows placed on the uphill side that would look at the new home. Therefore, there wouldn't be any notable impact with regard to light, air, views, or privacy. And due to the downhill slope of the lot from the roadway and the 40-foot deep front yard, the proposed height and massing will largely be below the street elevation and well set back and not immediately visible. And the architecture and the finishes combine together in an attractive and visually cohesive manner and complement the neighborhood. A survey of the FARs indicate that the proposed FAR is slightly above the average, but well within the range for the neighborhood, and also within the dominant range for floor areas of other lots surrounding the site. 14 of the 30 homes in the survey have a similar or higher FAR limit. The proposed plans have adequately employed mass reducing techniques that, such that the additional square footage of the site is mitigated and does not result in a home that overbuilds the lot. Well, with regard to the variance, while not entirely code compliant, the on-site parking is sufficient for the size of the home that's being proposed. And if desired, because it's wide enough, if the applicant needed to, they could stack guest parking in on the driveway and get probably 4 or 5 spaces easily when they need to. I think as a daily rule that won't happen, but it's a possibility for when they have more guests than normal. Full compliant with the parking standards on this smaller lot would require a 2-car garage that would dominate the front elevation of this home and significantly impact its architectural appearance. It would constrain the ground floor design and detract from the small scale residential character you'd see from the street otherwise. Additionally, multiple other properties in the neighborhood also benefit from less than compliant on-site parking, single car garages, parking decks, and this is consistent and compatible with the neighborhood. With regard to tree removal permit, the applicants have proposed clearing the site, and the trees that are being removed that meet the heritage size limit are first a Canary Island palm that's adjacent to the roadway. Department of Public Works has not objected to the removal of the tree in the street. It is close to the roadway, will eventually impact the roadway improvements, and is not a native tree for this area. Tree 13 is a Monterey pine, and that is a pyrophytic tree or a fire hazard tree. And it's also near a storm drain and not in great health. So the arborist has suggested it be removed. And we agree with that because it is a fire hazard type tree with high propensity to burn. Trees 3 and 6 are a little harder because they are coast live oaks. They are visible from the roadway. They're in the front yard. And they're quite attractive, but not that structurally sound or healthy. The Arbors Report was provided with the staff report, and it identified the issues that they had found, including some roots that were growing along the retaining walls, some decay in the trunk of one of the trees. And, you know, honestly, the larger issue is that the trees are so placed in the center that it makes it difficult to construct a new home that wouldn't impact the neighbors. You'd have to shift the house back further again to protect the trees and not grade in the area around them. You'd likely lose some of the on-site parking that we require by code, because it would be difficult to make a wide enough driveway or one that even is accessible on the slope. It would get too steep if you go too far back. So with all these design constraints, we have determined that we would support the removal of the oak trees as well. So in conclusion, staff recommends approval of the project. We've provided you with findings and conditions of approval for your consideration, and I am here to answer any questions.
Does anybody have any questions for Kristen?
I think Laura does.
Yeah, I do. I wondered about the movement of the house over. So it's sort of shifted over away from, I don't remember the numbers. It's towards, I think, 220 and away from the other house on the other side. So the whole building's shifted over. I'm wondering why that was done.
Well, it's a non-conforming setback that's in very close proximity to the property line. And the code requires a 5-foot side yard setback. So does building and fire codes essentially too, unless they do 1 hour fire rated construction.
By doing this shift, it makes them compliant on both sides?
Yes.
Because it just, and I know that's one of the things that the neighbor said, it just seemed like it then is very close to the house on the other side. That's all.
This new home will be fire sprinklered as well.
Okay, well, that was my question. I'll save the rest of my comments.
Does anybody else have any questions for Kristen? If not, I would ask that the applicant or the architect speak to this project.
And with the applicant, I wonder if Kristen could advise whether the applicant is raising their hand.
Anybody raising their hand?
I think Chris Skelton, the lawyer, is raising his hand.
Is that the applicant for the project? I apologize, I'm not familiar.
Yeah, I think he's the attorney for the project, so he probably is the person to speak.
Okay, thank you.
I think. I think.
Commissioners, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Yes, this is Chris Skelton.
Okay.
Yes, I am going to be presenting this evening on behalf of Jaron and Jenna for 224 Hawthorne.
Okay, go ahead.
Excellent. Kristen, I apologize. Can you put the presentation in PowerPoint mode or in presentation mode? If not, we can just go slide by slide. That's fine.
Kristen?
It looks like it may have been converted to a PDF, so perhaps it's a moot point. I will move on. Well, first of all, thank you very much to staff. An incredibly comprehensive and thorough presentation, as well as the staff report. This has been a long road, and it's been full of various iterations for the project. And I want to take you quickly through the project background and then explain the design a little bit more, especially relative to the most recent public comments that were received late this afternoon. So as I identified, this was an iterative process. We started off with actually tearing off of the original structure and adding a single-story addition onto the rear. When we look at the land use tools that Larkspur implements, we thought that that would be the most careful and conscientious and appropriate way to enhance the property to accommodate Jaren and Jenna, and then at the time their expected growing family, and I believe their daughter is nearly one now. After going through an initial submittal with staff and then working with the neighbors, the project, and I'll spare you the details and the sort of iterations 2 through 5, but the project ended at a full demolition of the property and a rebuild of a new home. And I will say that the process, I think, worked, because the finished product, as time consuming and at sometimes tormenting as it may have seemed to Jaren and Jenna to get here, I think the product at the end of the day is a far superior product, and that is absolutely revealed by the comments from Mark and Mary Sue Murray, the neighbors at 230 Hawthorne, who I believe unequivocally support the current project. So the development constraints naturally dictated the site strategy here. The width of the lot is 37.5 feet wide. When you add on 5-foot setbacks, you have a 27-foot wide sort of building envelope, so to speak. It's narrower than perhaps many San Francisco properties. And with input from the neighbors, that influenced the height setbacks and the improved parking conditions. And although the pre-existing home, which has already been identified, greatly benefited from nonconformities, which I believe a number of properties in the area benefit from, at the end of the day, abandoning those nonconformities, bringing this property into conformance with the current development standards, like I said, has rendered a superior project. And lastly, this project is kind of hamstrung because both adjoining properties really do benefit from non-conforming conditions. And we can go to the next slide because it's a good representation on the Marin map, how you can see both 220 and 230 really do pinch 224, which is unfortunate because 224 is naturally the narrowest lot of the 3 of those. So we can go, the last thing on this slide that I want to point out, and pardon me, is the neighborhood context and the pattern of development. If we go back to that Marin map slide, you can see how a lot of the properties are positioned closer to the front of the lot, and they all sort of fall within the same rhythm, if you will. Next slide. In case you didn't have an opportunity to come out to the property, I wanted to share with you some of the conditions as they exist today. These are photos that show the setback condition for the southern property at 220 Hawthorne. You can see that the property actually blends almost seamlessly in with the probably the cedar fencing. That property, as I believe the property owner submitted in the public comments, is situated approximately 18 inches from the true and correct property line. What is really important, and I'd like you to carry with you throughout this presentation and your deliberation this evening, is to take note of this wraparound deck that exists at the property right now. On the site plan, you'll see that the deck is measured 5 feet from the property line. And so this condition really does accurately represent the setbacks. And the new home is actually set back 5 feet 2 inches. So we did pull back the decking or enclose the decking and pulled it back slightly. Next slide. This is photos of the existing conditions on the northern side of the property. And as you can see, it is quite an uncomfortable squeeze to make it in between the existing structure at 224 Hawthorne and the property line fence. So for this reason in particular, not only to improve the setbacks, to improve circulation, to improve fire safety, the Murrays at 230 were very much opposed to the project originally as contemplated, which is a single-story addition. Next slide, please. as identified, with the first initial design proposal, we looked at doing a simple single-story addition that kept below the existing roof height for the overall property and extended out to the rear. We thought that this would be the least intrusive, both in terms of vantage points from the public right-of-way, because it wouldn't be visible, as well as for adjoining neighbors, because we weren't building up, we were building out. And as it turns out, and in working with the Murrays at 230 Hawthorne, this created quite a undesirable effect for them. And they were kind enough to work closely with us in identifying why this issue was undesirable, and went as far as to provide really focused and objective recommendations. They said, scrape and rebuild. Let's get the setbacks into conformance. Push your house as close as you can to the front setback, while still, maintaining compliance with development standards. And they even said, you need, if you're designing a house for your family and you need, 3 bedrooms, then you should build up. And we have no problem if you build up, as long as it's, appropriate and within the context of the overall neighborhood. And so we took those comments to heart, and in going through the different iterations of the project, we landed at a spot where we, I think, followed through with those recommendations from our neighbor and reached a superior design. Next slide, please. So again, this was comments from the Murrays. I'll skip through this, but essentially they provided a photo of the detrimental impact from the rear yard addition, which is highlighted in yellow. And they did say, we can support the FAR exception as long as the massing is directed to the front of the property. They did recommend a second story. Next slide, please. So we also engaged in dialogue with the neighbor to the south. And in that instance, there were predominantly 3 concerns, although certainly additional concerns have been expressed in the public comments. But I want to summarize what they were and how we tried to address them in this letter. So the first concern was that the new structure is too close to the property. And unfortunately, like I said, the property at 224 Hawthorne is really hamstrung because the adjoining properties already benefit from really restrictive legal non-conforming conditions. In particular, 220 Hawthorne is approximately 18 inches from the property line. So it gives a perception of close proximity. But 224 Hawthorne was developed to comply with those side yard setbacks. And as I said, it does pull back slightly on the ground floor. And as I'll point out in a future slide, the second story elevation was sucked back and stepped back even more from the first floor. In particular, on the southern side, we stepped back 2 additional feet to provide a sense of air and openness for the neighbor at 220 Hawthorne. There were also concerns raised about noise due to the proximity to the home. And, if you go back and you look at those photos of the northern portion of 220, it's important to note that there are no window openings. There's no active space on that northern side. And so when we think about noise, and we definitely thought about this when going through this iterative design process, there's currently a wraparound porch on 224 Hawthorne. What we've done is we've actually enclosed that porch, which should reduce the overall noise as it emanates towards 220 Hawthorne. By enclosing it, you're reducing the outdoor space, you're reducing the intensity of activity along that boundary line. And so we think that the design that was ultimately implemented addresses this noise concern quite well. And then secondarily, I guess somewhat related to noise, is that the second floor is wedding caked, as I describe it here, to create additional setback. And that also should afford some incidental sound attenuation as well. Finally, there were concerns raised about the drainage impacts from 224 Hawthorne onto 220. And as far as I'm aware, there is no integrated drainage plan or system in place at 224 Hawthorne. As you'll see in your application materials, There's a comprehensive civil engineer, both grading and drainage plan, and the resulting development will significantly enhance the drainage and manage the drainage on the property. So there should not be any issues in the future. Next slide, please. Lastly, and this is a photo, similar condition as presented earlier, but with the story poles in place. And I just wanted to share this because it shows that the roof eave of the project at 224 Hawthorne essentially measures up directly with the roof eave at 220 Hawthorne. I think that's really exemplary of the design measures that were implemented by the project team, because naturally this is a upsloping property as you move from 220 to 224 to 230, and so despite being at a higher elevation, our roof eaves actually do substantially mirror each other along the common boundary line. Next slide, please. So as I identified, we've done a number of, implemented a number of design elements to respond to the concerns that we were presented. And this is an example. The red lines, and I apologize, when it's converted to PDF, the animation unfortunately is I guess fully integrated, so you won't see how it should have unfolded. But essentially, these red vertical lines show the different walls, if you will, of the proposed structure. The line on the left, where the garage is, shows that the design was shifted as far to the west as possible, yet to still comply with the development standard setbacks. The second vertical red line representing the rear of the structure is to identify that the new project does not extend as far back to the east as the pre-existing structure. Said another way, the new home at 224 Hawthorne is shifted west and is further west than the rear of the building previously. And the same holds true for the rear of the deck. The existing deck compared to the proposed deck. The proposed deck is actually further to the west or further to the front of the lot than the pre-existing condition. Next slide, please. Oh, and I'm sorry, lastly on that, the green lines represent the outlines of the adjoining structures, and then the red arrows demonstrate that the property was further sort of pinched into the center of the lot, a nominal shift on the southern side because of the 5-foot setback, but a pretty significant shift on the northern side to move that structure outside of the setback and to comply with the current development standards. Next slide, please. So as I shared earlier, a number of massing reducing techniques were implemented. And again, I apologize, this slide definitely appears more jumbled and perhaps disorganized than it would in presentation form, but I'll try and walk you through it. At the top is a yellow box. That yellow box is to identify that the project implemented a 4 and 12 roof pitch. It's a really low slung roof pitch that directly relates to the overall height and massing of the project. It was very consciously designed that way, even though I believe existing roof slopes are slightly steeper, in order to keep the overall peak of the roof as low as possible to respect the views and vantage point for not only the property at 230, but also not to have the sort of perceived looming over 220. The low slung roof was implemented throughout. The secondary measure that was implemented was really taking quite conservative plate heights in implementing new construction. As I'm sure this commission is aware and has seen on numerous past projects, 10-foot plate heights, 9.6, sometimes even 11-foot plate heights are becoming more and more common. Naturally, it depends on the context, the neighborhood, the lot. But on this project, we implemented an approximate 9-foot plate height on the lower floor and an 8-foot plate height on the upper floor. Again, by current standards, these are really conservative plate heights, and was done to keep the overall massing of the property as low as possible. And then finally, and this is, I think, probably the most exceptional and unique condition that I've seen recently, at least on projects, is the owners designed the new project to literally bench down onto the property. So the current finished floor of the existing improvements is at 104.5, and the new finished floor for the proposed house on the lower floor is 102.5. And this is really quite unique, as I said, in large part because most people want to build up. They want to capture more views. They want to have more privacy. They want, those features are really desirable. But here, out of respect for the neighbors, the perceived massing, and in working with staff, we identified that there was an existing crawl space that was pretty significant in the existing house. We wanted to alleviate any concerns that that crawl space would be, developed or utilized for purposes in the future. And so what we did was we benched the house down into that existing space, or substantially into that existing space, by 2 feet. This did create a bit of a design challenge, certainly, because as you go down in the property, the steepness of your driveway also increases, and you run into kind of negative draining conditions where suddenly you're inviting water into your front door. So through civil engineering and with the builder consulting on the project, we identified that this was feasible, and we implemented it. One other point to note at the bottom, it identifies that the street elevation along the frontage of this property varies between 110 foot elevation closer to 230 and 105 closer to 220. That shows you kind of this cross slope as you stand on Hawthorne looking at the project. And again, based on those numbers, this property is going to be sunken relatively 2.5 to 7.5 feet below the elevation of the roadway. And so I think that's a really significant element that was not easily undertaken, but was implemented by the owners and the design team to demonstrate their commitment to mass reducing techniques. Next slide, please. There was a late public comment communication from a neighbor on Locust, I believe at 125 Locust, and he expressed concern about removal of the heritage palm tree. These are photos, in case you didn't have an opportunity to make it to the property, photos of this palm tree that is slated for removal. For a quick point of clarification, this is technically a street tree. It does not, it's not located on the property. It's located in along the property frontage. The tree is located almost right on top of the curb. It definitely encroaches into the public right-of-way, the edge of pavement as it functions, and it contributes to some, I would suggest, sort of dangerous sight lines, and also is known for sort of housing and accommodating vermin. And so we do think that this is an appropriate tree for removal. Secondarily, this is the location or approximate location of the replacement oak tree. So we hope that the commission will support the removal of this tree and replacement with a mature oak tree that I think is probably contextually more appropriate. Next slide. This is the pine tree at the rear of the property. To the left, you have the neighborhood context map. The black dot represents the approximate location of the pine tree. The Arbors Report that was submitted in consideration of the application materials identifies this as certainly an undesirable tree. It's listed on fire safe Marin as a pyrophytic and undesirable species. I don't believe it's in good health or structural integrity. And so this tree, although we definitely appreciate that it may provide certain shade benefits to the neighbor, is not appropriate for this location, especially in the context of ongoing fire hazards and safety concerns. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, there were significant design modifications that have been introduced to this project, which has spanned well over a year. And as I identify in this slide, the Murrays and Mark in particular was one of the loudest critics of the project at the outset. And I think it's a testament to the project team and the owners and the Murrays in working through the concerns that he had about the nonconformities, wanting to do away with those nonconforming conditions, expressing concern about shifting massing at the rear of the property into his sort of vantage point, especially in and around Mount Tam, and his active living spaces. And because of that, I think he submitted, both he and Mary Sue submitted a really glowing review of the project and support. We are requesting that the commission adopt the findings outlined in the staff report, and that the project is compatible with the neighborhood character. I didn't belabor for the presentation purposes going through the chart, the FAR chart, the floor area chart, the neighborhood context, because I think staff did a great job of summarizing that information and we didn't need to regurgitate it for you. The project absolutely results in a rehabilitation of the property, which has fallen onto some hard times. And I think most importantly, it's going to really eliminate the fire hazards and get rid of many of these nonconformities that exist. Because of the late comments received from the neighbor at 220 Hawthorne, I do just want to touch base briefly on the concept of the need for a variance. Larkspur Municipal Code specifically provides for a floor area exception. Staff has identified and supported that application through the staff report and the required findings. A variance is not required for the floor area in connection. And unfortunately, at least based on a careful read of the opposition letters, it feels a little bit like the floor area exception opposition is disingenuous, because at least in, I believe, 2 of the comment letters, it says, if the project is pushed further away from my property line, I have no problem with the floor area exception or the massing. And so this really, I think, boils down to, are the setbacks appropriate? And at least from our exhaustive efforts, and keeping in mind the constraints on this property, we have designed to exceed the minimum 5-foot setback on the first floor, and we're closer to 7 foot 2 inches setback on the second floor, and have implemented a number of mass reducing techniques that we believe adequately addresses this setback issue, in particular from a house that is non-conforming itself and has no active space, no windows or engagement on the northern side of its property. And so we hope that the commission will acknowledge these elements and support the application as recommended by the staff report. And with that, we welcome any comments, questions that you may have.
Does anybody have any comments or questions? Seeing none, I would ask if there is anybody else in the audience that wants to speak on this project. Do you see anybody?
The Dean Macaulay. Macaulay. Yeah.
Our first comment. Yes,
Dean Macaulay. Everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Hi, I live directly downhill from the property at 113 Locust. And in general, really happy to see this plan that's been a dilapidated property for a long time, and it'll be nice to see it cleaned up, and it looks like it's a nice project they've put together. My question's around drainage. There's already an enormous amount of water that flows off that hill through and under our yard when it rains. It's unbelievable how much water comes through our property. And the fall line from this house is directly down through our yard. So I'm concerned about drainage, both, well, two of the waivers, the FAR waiver and the tree waiver, both could also hurt drainage by having less roots to absorb water and less ground to absorb water. So I was heartened to hear Chris talk about the fact that there's a detailed drainage plan with the property. I would be curious, I guess that's my question, is the details of that drainage plan and exactly where the water coming off the house will be deposited. So maybe Chris, or if you have an architect there there, you could address that. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions or would like to speak?
Our next comment is from C. Gerskowitz.
Yeah, Glenn Herskowitz. Yeah, I appreciate a lot of the efforts going into the project, and there's a lot I am happy with about it. You mentioned a couple things, and I know you got the story poles, but I don't think that covers. That's the wall of the house. That's not the eaves. So the eaves actually extend further into that setback space. Am I correct on that? And so there's really a tight space there by the time the eaves are done. And going back to the setback, because this lot is a small lot, first off, normal setbacks are 6 feet for habited space. So this has already got an exception of the 5 feet. So yes, there's a 5 foot setback, but the reason why it extends so far towards the setback is because the floor area ratio is as high as it is. And what I was, I wrote a letter to your client there, Chris, and he never discussed any of this with me other than to respond that, oh, everything's going to be honky-dory. Well, it was very condescending. And the issue that I have is that, it poses definitely a fire danger of some sort, whether it comes off a roof or wildfire, whatever. Plus, the noise is really a major issue at that point. Now, if the floor area ratio was 200 feet smaller, it would be a lot on that side, especially, it would have been a lot more compatible for my concerns. And also, I just want to mention one other thing about windows and light. I do have a window that gets blocked in the back for the morning sunrise in the winter, or excuse me, in the summer, over in on the east side. So there is that. Now, the first submission you guys sent, I feel like it's a little smoke and mirrors. You're talking about this first submission, which was so out of line that somehow we're supposed to digest a 50% increase in floor area as acceptable. Yes, there's a lot of good things about the project, but even with a 50% increase, or looking at what a normal slope would have been, you're still in excess of what a normal slope would have been. So, you're asking for quite a large structure, and of course the uphill neighbors are ecstatic about that shift over, because they went from this non-conforming and having their 5 or 6 feet to now shifting it over to my side where it's 5 or 6 feet, and they have 10 feet or 11 feet. So yeah, and I've worked with Mark on the project, talking about some of the issues. Unfortunately, my issues weren't addressed in that particular area. And one of the other concerns that I want to raise is that, most of the views for the houses here look to the southeast. It's really actually, quite frankly, we're pretty much pointing south. So what happens is all the balconies and all those windows will look over my yard, look into my yard. So there's, loss of privacy there, because people aren't uphill. Everyone's looking down towards town. And let me go here. Okay. So, I did have a concern about the eaves and how they overhang beyond that setback. And the privacy issue, because it's now looking down on the yard. And I just want to make a note about, I heard the earlier comment on the prior house about handling construction. You know, you can already see from the pictures that I sent, the wood from the old garage leaning up against my house down at the bottom, the old rotten wood, because when they put up the story poles, they didn't even clear the wood off my wall. They just left it there. And so I had to move it afterwards, but you can see from the pictures where it is. So, you know, I don't know how that's going to be handled when it's so close to the house. And then see here. And I just, you know, that's my main concerns. You know, as far as the trees go, you know, if the oaks were trimmed, I think it would have been probably fine, but they haven't been trimmed forever. At least since I've been here, they've never done a thing to them. I don't care about that palm, that should go, and I don't care about the Monterey pine. But I think, you know, you need to look at the overhangs with regard to that setback, because it's already a non-conforming setback on both lots now, because that lot is smaller and this lot, it is what it is. It was here before I got here. There's nothing I can do. I can't move the house. Wish I could, but that's not possible. So anyway, with that, you know, you really have a tight space there, and there will be noise issues. And I think that's a real concerning fact, because the floor area ratio is large enough that the house gets wide, and because of that, there's a proximity, because the floor area ratio is excessive. And I you know, I know I heard some comments about it being consistent. My house is within the floor area ratio, so I don't know what the comments are about excessive floor area ratios around this neighborhood, but I know I'm within conformity with regard to the floor area ratio. Anyway, I mean, look, you know, as far as I'm concerned, if my concerns were just taken a little bit into account, I wouldn't even oppose the project. But, you know, the floor area ratio, if it was trimmed back 200 square feet, or those overhangs are adjusted, then, you know, or those overhangs are adjusted, I don't think alone that's enough. Those combinations would make me satisfactory with the project. You know, and I do have one other concern too, which is, you know, if they demolish this I don't see them catching every rat that's in that place, because it's rat infested. I've already sent a picture of one rat I caught, and you know, there has to be some extermination prior to demolishing that, because those rats are going to scurry everywhere. And I know Pierre down in Locust, he's had those rats head his direction, and I've had them where I caught one recently. So I have a real concern about how that will be dealt with. And then just, you know, the drainage issue, you know, there's obviously he doesn't even have drains or gutters on the house right now, so it's just been pouring off into leaves that have piled up over the years. And so, you know, one time there was and because of all that over the years, I know a cedar tree that was on his property went down, landed on his roof, and also pushed out that retaining wall that separates the two properties towards my property. In other words, it landed on his and pushed it out. Now, that water's been draining up against those walls for a long time, and I actually was supposed to have, Chris was supposed to actually correct that issue in an agreement, but he purged himself in court and said that we had no agreement, and I trusted him as a neighbor that he would do it right, and he obviously didn't. So I actually put a drain on my side down at the past my house to catch everything that was still rolling underneath the the wall at the smaller wall. So, you know, obviously there's some real issues there that have to be addressed on that drainage. And I know you have a plan, but you know, I'll have to have somebody talk to me about it, what they plan on doing, so I have a better explanation. But it has to be moved past my yard into something, not, you know, just dumped out back into my yard. And then downhill neighbor on Locust, also Dean, had the same issue, because you know, it's just been running off there, coming right through, and it hasn't been captured. And it should be captured on the north or the high side of the house before it starts running down. So those are issues that should be done, and I guess it should be kept on both sides, quite frankly. Anyway, I mean, that's my concerns, and I think if the floor area ratio was a little bit more conducive to the footprint, it would solve the issues. So, you know, I don't think you're far off. Personally, I think, you know, there's a lot I can support about the project. You know, I just wish my concerns had been taken into consideration here prior to today, because clearly now we're in a situation where some people are recommending it and really ignored this issue of noise and what happens when you increase floor area ratio. And it's quite a windfall if they build a house that's 600 some square feet above the allowable. So, you know, that's the way it is. So anyway, look, that's the way I feel about it. I hope that the Planning Commission will ask them to take a look back at that issue of floor area ratio, of finding a place to reduce it, and maybe address those eaves as well, that, like I said, go from a 5 foot to another 2 foot overhang. So now you're talking 3 feet between 4.5 feet between the property at that point. It's really close, you know. So
hey, I think we understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I appreciate all your comments.
Thanks,
So,
Brock. Yeah.
all right, thanks. Anybody else with their hand raised?
The applicant has raised his hand again if you would like to hear from him. Otherwise, there is no further public comment.
Long as it's brief. So yes, let's hear from him.
Okay.
Thank you, commissioners. Yes, absolutely. I will be brief in the comments. I just wanted to respond to some of the questions and comments that were raised. Starting with drainage. Yes, we are aware that the current improvements on the property have zero drainage facilities. I don't believe there are any gutters, downspouts, collections, detention basins, or anything else that even remotely comes close to today's standards. All of those elements, thankfully, are depicted on the Zoom presentation on C3, the civil plan. Civil plan demonstrates that there will be a very comprehensive and robust drainage plan. Related to drainage, and this goes back to one of the comments about the floor area exception, the comment basically is because we are building a bigger house, we're going to have more drainage impacts. I don't believe that to be the case. I think that our overall footprint is relatively of the same scale as the pre-existing conditions. And so what is different is there is now a second story that is being constructed on this house. That second story occupies entirely the same footprint as the first story, since there's no cantilevered elements. The second story was pursued as a recommendation from the upslope neighbor at 230 Hawthorne, which, you know, despite their view angle and view corridor across 224 and across 220 and the lower properties, they said, you build up, just don't build back. So I don't think that there is a problem with the drainage, and I fully expect, based on the qualified civil engineer who prepared the drainage plan, that all surrounding properties will receive a material benefit, especially relative to current conditions. The other element that I want to address is this notion of the floor area exception and the setbacks. And just as a quick reminder, floor area ratio is a metric for evaluating height, bulk, and mass. It is a way for planners and design professionals and commissioners and decision makers to provide a objective criteria in the form of a calculation. And so the floor area ratio, again, is a metric for evaluating height, bulk, and mass. The tools that we implemented, I believe, reveal that this project is totally within the appropriate height, bulk, and mass, which was identified in the staff report and supported by a number of neighbors. And excuse me, as a reminder, there are circumstances where quite small houses can actually appear looming and significant, and larger houses or houses with substantial floor area can appear de minimis and relatively reduced. I think we fall into that latter category, and I don't mean to say that we have a lot of floor area, because we absolutely don't. When you look at the chart that was submitted as part of the project narrative, and I believe included in the staff report. Yep. Sorry, it shows that this project harmonizes and is consistent with the overall averages in the neighborhood. The last comment goes to the setback question or request from the property owner at 220, who said, you know, he wished that we had worked with him more on providing an accommodating setback. And he was looking for some dimension approximating 10 to 12 feet from the face of his building. And we did carefully study that. And I want the commission to know that there were no emails that were condescending. We always responded professionally and carefully. But as a practical matter, with 220 Hawthorne being 18 inches from the property line, that would mean that the setback for 224 would be on the scale of 9 to 11 feet to accommodate that 10 to 12 foot setback. And with a 37 foot wide lot, it's functionally infeasible. And so we did build slightly less than to the setback on the first floor. And we did take the neighbor's concern into consideration, especially on the second floor, by wedding caking in a full 2 feet. And if you look at 220 Hawthorne, which I acknowledge is a pre-existing condition, it does not step back the second floor element. Lastly, for the commissioner's consideration, to the extent that you do have questions or concerns about the roof eaves, although we think that the roof eaves are appropriate, they're to scale, they harmonize with the neighborhood, you know, I think the roof eaves could be reduced by about 6 inches so that they don't extend quite as far. I don't think that it's a material difference to the neighbor. I think that it would have a slightly adverse impact on the overall scale of the project. But if that's something that is of interest to the commission, then I think you know, that's something that could probably be implemented.
What are the roof eaves right now as drawn?
Currently, they're designed at 2 feet, and we think the design professionals felt like that was appropriate and in scale, especially with the low slung roofs and looking around at the various other projects in the neighborhood.
Okay, thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much.
Just for clarification, the code does allow a roof eave overhang to encroach into the setback up to 2 feet.
Yes. Okay, are there any others out there that wish to speak?
We have a neighbor again, C. Gersquist, with his hand raised. If you would like him to be able to speak again, I can unmute him.
I think we understand where he's coming from. Unless you know, the rest of you think we should listen one more time. So I would like to bring it back to the Planning Commission. I'm going to ask Daniel to comment on what he's heard and his thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to try to keep this as brief as I can. Brock, thank you. I think this application was very thoughtful. It's as thoughtful as any I've seen in terms of working with a very constrained and pinched property. So a lot has to do with those setbacks, and I think that a denial of this project because of the proximity of 220 would in fact be depriving the applicant of privileges that other projects would enjoy. It would also be requiring this project to essentially compensate for the nonconformity of a different property, which I don't think would be quite fair. You know, if the home were actually designed to overbuild the lot, that would be that would be one thing, but I really don't get that impression from this design program. We're not looking at a trophy home. We're looking at something slightly in excess of 2,000 feet. Am I a little bit saddened to see the live oaks leave? Yes, but I don't think there's any way around it. And certainly the palm tree and the Monterey pine, they definitely have to go. With regard to those eaves, I mean, if the applicant can see their way clear as a matter of sort of courtesy and accommodation to reduce the eave by 6 inches, well, I'll leave that up to them. But it's not required by code that they do so. And if there's any further danger of water entry because the eaves are too shallow, they might want to take that into consideration. So having said that, having listened attentively to the objections of the neighbor 220, and taking everything into consideration and the thoughtfulness of the submission, I think I can make the findings.
Thank you, Daniel. Jeff?
I'll be even briefer. I agree with everything that my esteemed colleague, Mr. Kunstler, said. I personally would not change the eaves because I think from a design standpoint, it makes the house look the way it should look architecturally. I agree with the trees, particularly the palm and the Monterey pine. Having had a Monterey pine on a past house of mine, they are very dangerous from a fire standpoint, and that should be mitigated. I think the overall design is very nice for the property. I have no problem with the FAR, considering it's the square footage of the house and the character of the neighborhood. Having driven around the neighborhood, I think it's consistent with what's there. So I can make findings for this project. I think it's a really great project.
Thank you, Jeff. Laura?
I think I'll just piggyback on what others have said. I kind of came into the meeting today being concerned about the proximity to 220, and I guess I didn't realize that 220 was non-conforming. I mean, I did, but I guess I didn't really focus on it. It was more going to the site and seeing how close they were. But I also agree with Daniel that if we denied this and they are in conformity, that really is, denying them a privilege that others would have. I think the heritage tree removal is fine, and the parking variance is fine. I still am a little uncomfortable with how the house relative to the next door neighbors, but I guess I could see clear to supporting the project for the reasons I already stated.
Thank you. Natasha?
Yes, hi, thank you. So I don't think I need to go into the level of detail that I normally do, because I agree with a lot of what my fellow commissioners have said. I just want to make a couple of specific comments, though, which is I wanted to thank Mr. Skelton for his very detailed presentation. I'm sorry it wasn't in presentation mode, but I thought it was very comprehensive and very, very helpful. I do want to tell the neighbor at 220 that his concerns have been heard. And I think the neighbors have tried to address them. I don't think changing the FAR is necessarily going to be the solution, because it really needs to shift the whole property, and then you start breaking the rules on the setbacks on the other side. So I think, and it's very hard to put a property in that small, narrow space. So I do hope that the neighbors will work with him on some of his other concerns on, like, the rats removal, and I think that your drainage will be I think because they're now addressing the drainage, that will be resolved, and I will leave it up to them to see if they want to reduce the size of the eaves. I'm not an architect, but I will leave that up to the neighbors to decide. Parking and has already been discussed. So really the only other additional comment I had was on the tree heritage removal. I think we had the opportunity to ask for a replacement of 4 trees, if I'm correct in reading the notes on the report. You know, I hate trees being removed. I understand that they have mature trees do have a lifespan, and some of these trees are quite dangerous, especially the leaning one. So if we can ask for 4 replacement trees, and I don't know if they can be put into the ground rather than into a box. I'm not sure why they have to be in a box and not into the ground. That would be great. So I'm not sure if that can be written into the condition of approval or not, and what my fellow commissioners think about that.
The box size is just giving you an idea of how mature the tree is that they're going to plant in the ground.
Oh, okay. So it's not, okay. That answers that question. Thank you. So yeah, that just leaves the 4 replacement trees if that is something that can happen.
Thank you. I actually think they've done a really nice job on this house. It's a very small family house, and it does provide 3 bedrooms, and it provides bathrooms, and it provides an open space living room, and it respects the setbacks that are allowed on this property. So I think they've done a good job. I think it's really difficult to accommodate everybody. I think if they could make the eaves 18 inches and that helped neighbor friendliness, I don't think it would affect the project too much, but I'm okay if they keep them. So in heritage trees, the palm tree could go, and the other tree too, I think, and hopefully they'll plant. I didn't see what size boxes, whether they're 2 or 3 feet, but if they can afford 3-foot boxes, that would be bigger trees to start with. And the variance to parking, I think they've done a good job. One of the things that you've got in this house you have to deal with is you've got, let's see, 247 square feet of garage that comes out of the square footage of what is the overall. So it's a smaller house living space wise than what appears as the number. So anyway, I can make the findings, and I would look forward to somebody making a motion.
I did the last one.
I guess I can do this one. Okay, so this is for design review, floor area ratio exception variance and heritage tree removal permit number 2034. Are we going to put in the 4 replacement trees as condition of approval? I know that's something I would like, but I don't know if that needs to be
already.
No, I don't think so. Kristen, can you?
They proposed 2 trees. It's up to the planning commission if you'd like to impose the 2-to-1 ratio for the removal of the 2 oaks instead of just a 1-to-1 ratio. It's a policy the city has implemented over the years, but you have exerted some flexibility on this when the lots are small and it's a little bit difficult to really replace the numbers.
I would go with whatever, the majority of my fellow commissioners wish to do, but I'm personally okay with the 2-to-1. In this particular situation, I'm actually okay with a 2-to-1 ratio instead of a 4-to-1 ratio, given the overall environment.
A 1-to-1 instead of a 2-to-1?
1-to-1 rather than 2-to-1. Given the overall environment.
I agree with that. It's a small lot. I think you don't want to crowd it.
Okay, so we leave as drafted with no additional change to the conditions. So that's it from the proposal.
I think that's it. Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
I,
Aye.
Any opposed? So it passes. There is a 10-day appeal period. And thank you, everybody, for appearing and speaking.
Thank you, Allison. I'll take it from here.
Thank you. Have a nice evening.
So we have some business items.
Let me go get Neil really quick.
I'm actually here.
Oh,
I'm on.
Okay.
On the regional housing needs.
Yeah, and what I'd like to do is share the screen. And can I confirm with Kristen and or Allison, if you're going to be leaving, that I can complete and close the hearing?
I'll stay. Allison's
Okay.
leaving.
Okay.
So I need to share your screen.
Yeah, let me get on screen here. And let me bring up my video. And
don't know if it's going to cause problems, but I must be off at 9:30.
okay, this may be pretty quick. I'll try to get through it. And then if you have a question or something that's particular,
The only thing we may need Laura for is to approve the minutes. I'm not sure who was there. I wasn't there.
I was there, and we could go to that if you.
If you
We do
guys
that
want to
now.
change the agenda and approve the minutes, I
Yeah.
think
Neil, I just made you a host. You should be able to share your screen.
okay.
Would somebody like to move to approve? the
I'll
minutes?
move to approve the minutes.
Second.
And I can second. Oh, yeah.
Beat you to it.
All in favor?
Jeff wins.
Aye.
Aye.
And I have to abstain. And I think, does Daniel have to abstain?
I have to abstain as well, yes.
All right.
Okay. So we'll note the vote was 3-2 with Chairman Wagstaff and Vice Chair Kinsler abstaining.
Or 3-0 with 2 abstain.
Yeah, 3-0-2.
Yeah. Okay, Neil, you're up.
Okay, let me bring up a screen share here. Can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yeah.
It should just be the screen that says housing element.
Yes.
Okay. All right. What I'd like to do here tonight is begin the conversation with the Planning Commission on the upcoming housing element and work program. The housing element is a very important part of the city's general plan. It's kind of treated as a parallel plan to the general plan as being the most significant sort of with the greatest amount of state law and oversight as to that element. And it requires updating on a schedule a bit different than the general plan itself. So I want to begin this conversation. We're working with a consultant now to begin to contract for the housing element. And I'll be bringing this discussion, this presentation to the City Council on August 18th. And I think at that point, I'll have a little more fleshed out work program and a timeline. But it's important to keep both boards involved because it is a planning document. So therefore, it requires review by the Planning Commission as well as adoption by the City Council. And the timeline is getting a bit tight. So I'll explain that a little bit later, but we certainly have to begin this process and get the housing element work program moving. So just quickly to go over in case anyone's needs a little refresher, what's a housing element? Well, as I mentioned, it's one of the most, it's one of the elements of the general plan that has the most mandates and requirements and oversight by the Department of Housing and Community Development. It must be updated every 8 years and certified by the Department of Housing and Community Development. The city of Larkspur has been meeting its housing element requirements since 1990, and we last received a state certification of the 2015 and 2023 housing element in May of 2015, but it is now approaching time for what would be called the 6th cycle. That was our 5th cycle in the Bay Area. We'll be approaching the 6th cycle housing element. The basis of the housing element is really to meet your housing needs, and the big basic housing number is the RHNA, the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, that's mandated by the state. And the role of the various agencies, the state identifies the total number of units across income groups for which a region must plan for in its 8-year period, which is now the 6th cycle. Our region is also referred to as the Council of Governments under state law, as ABAG, the Association of Bay Area Governments, the 9-county group of governments of the Bay Area. And it is ABAG that then takes the number applied from the state and then applies methodology based on state law and based on local demographics and trends, in this case incorporating a lot of the Plan Bay Area, the sustainable community strategy, the long-term planning strategy for the Bay Area, to meld housing and jobs and transportation over the long term. It takes a lot of information from that plan and develops a methodology to then assign each community a share of the housing need. So each local government then must update its housing element to meet that RHNA, the Regional Housing Need Allocation, as determined by ABAG. And it has to show how it plans to accommodate its share of the regional housing need. And kind of beyond past housing elements, the exercise is not just it's not just an exercise in how we might do it, but it's really, you have to demonstrate how you're going to meet the housing need, as opposed to past exercise, as opposed to past RHNA and housing element cycles, which typically you just had to demonstrate that your zoning and your policies could generally accommodate the housing. It is now more incumbent to actually realize the housing share under state law. So the Department of Housing and Community Development has applied a total need for the 8-year period to ABAG of 441,176 units. This is a pretty significant increase from the last regional housing need determination of just under 200,000 units. And you can see that what they also do when they make this determination is they break out the number and percentage of those units that have to fall into or be developed to meet certain income categories, both very low income, and moderate income categories. The above moderate income being considered what is basically market rate housing. So Larkspur's RHNA has increased significantly as the region's total went up 235% since this last cycle. This methodology is used to is using not just our future need, but also our existing need. So the draft methodology that's been adopted by RHNA is putting more emphasis not just on what is anticipated over the next 8 years, but really what is the need now as well. And I believe that is a lot of the reason some of the share has increased dramatically over the allocation has increased dramatically over past allocations. Additionally, more housing is being planned in areas with high resources, what are considered high resources in terms of schools, infrastructure, transit facilities, services. So these are areas like Marin County, and with a greater emphasis on equity. So the past RENA allocation and past Plan Bay area was really focusing a lot of the housing more focused towards job centers. This RENA allocation is tending to balance that out a little more in favor of creating more equity into areas that have high resources. So we're seeing places like Marin County, higher end suburban communities actually getting some higher numbers or percentages than they had in the past. While our overall numbers are of course much less than major urban centers, proportionally or per capita, it's a bit higher. And particularly in Larkspur, where we do have two transit stations near the Larkspur Landing area, as well as the city being very much located within two what are considered high opportunity transit corridors, and corridors with bus transit that are also high resource areas. So those two combinations of factors certainly have created a fairly high share for Larkspur. And so our draft RENA, and let me go back here. Our past RENAs, you can kind of see these numbers. They were fairly high from 1990 through early 2000s, totaling up about 300, and then 382 up to 2000 to 2014. In our last RENA cycle, it actually dipped a bit lower, and that was because of, as I was saying, the Plan Bay area was actually focusing more housing towards the job centers in the East Bay, San Francisco, and the Peninsula. That has somewhat flipped in this current approach. So now we see a RENA allocation where the combination of the existing demand plus future demand, as well as all these other factors of high resource areas and creating equity, have led to a 700% increase, over 700% increase in our total number. And I think a particular note here is these numbers at the low and the very low income range. 291 units for very low income, and 168 units for, very low, and for 168 for low. And these are units that really require either a significant amount of market rate housing, particularly low income, to get built. Low income can be built typically in conjunction as a inclusionary housing as a small percentage of market rate housing, of multiple units of market rate housing. You can generally include low and moderate income if it is for sale housing. If it is rental housing, then you can include very low income. But again, it's a small percentage. Typically, these numbers are 20% in total in a mixture of these. So you're looking at anywhere from 5 to 10% of very low or low in any significant development. So unless you have projects that are sponsored by nonprofit housing corporations, nonprofit housing groups, it's very difficult to realize these. These can be realized somewhat in ADUs. We're studying the ability to continue to carry that over. However, ADUs are only going to be built at a clip where it's going to be difficult to realize these kind of numbers. So that's a particular challenge, I think, with our RENA. And so just to give you a picture of Marin County, these are the numbers across Marin for including the unincorporated county. up to 14,380 units required over this cycle. Now, what I'm showing here is the RENA development timeline. This is kind of how we came to this number, and we're actually, and I'm going to, all full disclosure, this is a slide presentation that was created by the county that I've tailored to this presentation. But we are in fact kind of about this point here in summer. Sorry, I'm pointing at the wrong area. We're at this point of summer of 2021. So you've seen it's been a long process of ABAG, the methodology committee, developing the methodology and then applying it. And we are now at a point where we've commented on the methodology. We've commented twice and have had concerns with the baseline approach to the methodology. And we've now in a period where the final draft allocation has been released, and it is a period of appeal both by agencies or outside groups. And in fact, 2 weeks ago, we did submit an appeal to ABAG. However, I'll say it's challenging to appeal because the basis of the appeal is fairly narrow, and it's not made easy to appeal. It certainly is. It's a methodology that's been thought through and supported by HCD, the Department of Housing Community Development. So it's supported, but some of the methodology and how it was arrived at is very vague or uncertain. There's a lot of data and underlying the methodology that is just not clear to many cities. So there are some questions to that, but that's an appeal process. And the irony here is, as I've said, time is already of the essence in order to meet a deadline to adopt a housing element at the end of next year. Now, what we do need to have in place at the end of next year is sort of a final draft housing element adopted by the city. And then there is a few months of grace period during review by HCD. So it's not the final, but you certainly need to have your ducks in order by the end of next year. And the irony here is the final RENA actually is not actually issued until January of this year after all the appeals have been issued. That all said, it's unlikely that these numbers will sway in any direction, one direction or another to any great degree. But of course, again, it remains uncertain until that final allocation and ABAG board approval is issued during December of this year. So it's kind of an interesting point. So why has the RENA increased? As I've said, we've obviously see a higher total regional housing need, both in the existing and in the future. There's greater emphasis on social equity, which particularly places more burden for housing production on those areas that have higher resources and transit. There's expanded oversight by the state agency as to the methodology and the allocations. And there are more factors to consider in the allocations. So the methodology has taken in, again, really the high cost of living in this area is a factor. And so there's a number of factors that worked into that. What's also challenging is the requirements for identifying eligible sites will be more stringent. In the past, in the past 2 cycles, we've identified the Bon Air site as being a potential housing site. It was identified in the inventory, and it made for a significant part of our RENA allocation, our RENA goal. But clearly Bon Air has not sought to necessarily develop housing on its site. So in order to include or continue to include, and I'll get into this in a little bit, we'll have to look at policies and programs to better incentivize development in a location like Bon Air Shopping Center or other sites in order to encourage redevelopment. And so getting to that, how do we meet RHNA? Evaluate the current and past housing element sites, focus on choosing sites that are consistent with the general plan where possible. However, we may have to introduce zoning amendments to reduce obstacles to development. And we may be required to rezone or increase densities and or introduce by right development programs for some of these sites in order to reuse them. And a by right program can be a program where you basically permit development, housing development that meets certain criteria for housing at a certain density, and you might employ objective design standards or sort of minimum design standards for the development, but you cannot impose subjective design standards. You can't have design review. So we'll be, again, tasked with finalizing objective design standards so we can assure that development that is done through a by right process also meets some of the city's goals in terms of being a good development that works within the community and with its neighbors. Other ways to meet it is to certainly to involve the community, do outreach for both stakeholders and underserved communities, and solicit ideas. And maybe there are things that we or the professionals aren't aware of or don't know about, or just come up with some creative ideas that might help work to address the housing need. And of course, we'll be working with economic and planning consultants to promote, and find the best practices to suit the city in order to encourage affordable housing. And we'll continue and expand upon existing work to facilitate ADUs. We have adopted ordinances consistent with the state laws to reduce obstacles to ADUs and further incentivize them. We're still finding that we're not getting a significant number of ADUs that can meet many of these, even the least stringent requirements. We're finding either property owners want to build ADUs that are larger than some of the minimum requirements to simply waive discretionary review to do by right ADUs. They want to do larger ones or ones that don't fit on the site. Or in some cases, they like to do a very simple ADU, but really don't want to invest the money to make it a habitable unit. We've had requests to simply put a kitchenette in a garage and call it an ADU when you really need to seal the garage door, create flooring, create some level of habitability. So it's been surprising some of the challenges we've faced, where I think property owners either want to invest in a pretty significant project or they really don't want to invest. They'd like to get the ADU without much cost. So the challenge is finding that sweet spot in the center. And that'll be more discussion and probably more review in the housing element itself to determine what we can do to better facilitate ADUs. And just to kind of circle back why we need a housing element, again, it's primarily recognizing Marin is an area that is very challenging for housing for low-income groups, workers, young people out of school. All these populations struggle to live in Marin. Homelessness is on the rise. This has been, of course, exacerbated by the pandemic and its economic impact, but we certainly know that, endemic to Marin County is a very high cost of living. We've certainly seen this in our own offices, as I've reported earlier tonight. We are still working to recruit for this position, and we know that lower level salaried planners, assistant planners, associate planners struggle to live in this area or have to commute long distances in order to work here. And those all present challenges for workers we've had and for recruiting for more positions. So programs that can help to create both missing middle housing and lower income groups, particularly those that might support emergency workers and city workers, are going to be an important element to this project. And kind of just focusing again on that is this is a slide that provides some statistics in Marin regarding the various populations that are challenged in working in Marin. You have any questions about these so far?
Hey, Neil, I've got to get going pretty soon because I've cases at about 5:30 in the morning. So how long we have left to go?
In fact, I am just about done. So let me get through this. So really, to get to the meat of the matter, I'm currently engaging in contract discussions with available consultants, particularly one group that specializes in housing element work. The county, Marin County has had a collaborative and ABAG, they're both going to be providing assistance with demographic information to support our housing needs and programs, and also providing policies to address programs and policies to address equity issues. And equity is a big part of this, not just the housing element document, but the program, the outreach and the program to develop the housing element. So major milestones we'll be looking at is going to be public engagement and outreach. We're looking at a combination of a website, meetings, workshops, and surveys. Again, emphasis on equity and diversity. The development of the document requires an analysis of our housing needs. What are the constraints? And developing a site's inventory. What are the sites that are most likely, and what's it going to take to not just accommodate, but really encourage and incentivize housing development on those sites, and ultimately the draft goals, policies, and programs. The final pieces will be drafting the draft and final documents, preparation of draft housing element, a CEQA analysis and public hearings, and then finally adoption of the final housing element by the Planning Commission and City Council. I've highlighted HCD coordination here because it'll be important for us and our consultants to communicate and coordinate with HCD during this process, make sure we're on the right track, and particularly during the HCD review period between the time of the approval of the draft housing element and the adoption of the final housing element. HCD does a review and will provide input on the adequacy of the draft document for certification. And with that, again, our next step will probably be a lot of focus on community feedback, workshops, stakeholder meetings, housing needs, and website. So look for that. Do you have any questions for me? And I know, Jeff, you're going to be leaving soon. I think, Laura, has she left the meeting already?
Laura's left, yeah.
Okay.
I think at some later date I might have those comments, particularly as those of us who are going to be participating in reviewing the housing element when we start to meet.
Right.
One of the things that does strike me, I'll just give you a little sneak preview. One of the things that does strike me is that it would really be helpful if we had other templates or other examples where we could look at communities that have faced also large changes in their demographics and large changes in their housing needs, which have sort of changed somewhat the character of their communities because that's what had to happen in order to accommodate housing. So if there were other templates that we could look at, I mean, that would be great. So, for example, I was back in on the East Coast in May, and I went through the city of Stamford, Connecticut, which used to be like pretty much of a small town and now is sort of mushroomed into what's a small city, and its character has changed radically. Whether that's been to the benefit of that community or not, I really don't know, but it would be nice to see how people did it, to see what they did right and what they did wrong. Because otherwise we're working a little bit in a vacuum.
Well, and I think one thing I did want to emphasize on the previous slide, I'll kind of back up just because I think this is probably the topical issues. Many of agencies in the last several months, all the directors have been discussing this issue, the housing element and the collaborative. And many agencies have been challenged to find consulting support. They've put out RFPs. I did some outreach initially and certainly found it was not getting response. And many of the consultants, even those in the Bay Area, have been, what's happened is the Southern councils of government, San Diego and the LA area, Southern California, went through this cycle at their level started a year ago. So they're in the tail end of, they've issued their final housing elements. They're going through certification processes. So a lot of the consulting firms have been challenged just in that process, and they're still very busy in that process. And they're also beginning to help all the various communities around the Bay Area and Northern California now that this area is entering this sixth cycle. And so there is some experience of this cycle of the HCD approach and some of the requirements and mandates. And the consultant I'm talking to has actually worked with a few of those agencies and is in that process of wrapping up. So I think we'll be able to get some information on that. But I would also note here, full disclosure, the county in its collaborative had been working on a concept of doing a collaborative housing element project, basically being with the county being a lead and all the agencies utilizing a consultant group to sort of share resources, avoid redundancies of issues. While each community in Marin is different in its character and so on, there's still a lot of similar issues relative to our demographics, our topography, and so on. So there was an effort underway for the last several months to kind of maybe create a collaborative housing element process, which I felt would be a pretty strong approach, just as long as each community was given the full attention it needs. And it's kind of like creating a housing workbook and then really, toning it, fine-tuning it to your community. But ultimately, because of all the constraints with getting consultants, getting one on board for that, a number of communities dropped off in that, and the county ultimately could not justify, sort of using funding for that position. So what I have gotten out of that is a line on one or two consultants that were open for that work and we're now negotiating with. But as I said, I think a consultant that we're talking with right now has had experience, has been successful, and particularly in dealing with the equity issues that are now required and mandated for the housing element. So I'm thinking we can get in a good place to get this moving.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. At some point, Daniel and I and Gabe and I guess it's Kevin
Yeah, Kevin.
should probably get together.
Yeah, well, and the other thing is, we did create the housing steering committee, not solely for the housing element, but also to address there's a number of different housing kind of programs underway and in the future. And I think there's value there. What I do need to do is with the recognizing that the housing element mandates for public outreach and so on are fairly expansive. I'll be talking with the consultant about the best use of the role of the steering committee. I mean, I found it very effective, but we also need to really make sure we're engaging the wider public and various stakeholders. And where in the past it was often a method of, well, we'll just get a lot of people to raise their hands and get all these stakeholders and everyone in a room to join a big housing, advisory committee or working group. That can be pretty unwieldy. So the steering committee really can work as a very efficient tool for bouncing those ideas. But on the same hand, we do need to demonstrate that the city is actively really outreaching to, the broader community, and not just the community that tends to be involved in these matters, but the community that needs to be involved in these matters, whether it's workers or more underserved populations within the community. So that'll be certainly a part of this effort.
Definitely.
But I'll be, as I said, I'll be trying to get a good idea of what would the role of the steering committee be within that framework to make it efficient for everyone.
Okay. Are there any planning commissioner reports? Don't hear any, but would somebody like to move to be adjourned?
I'll do that. I move to adjourn.
And I'll second.
All in favor of adjournment?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Like to talk forever.
Opposed? No, I'm joking.
All right. Good
Okay.
night, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Thanks
All right,
a lot.
good night.
Bye-bye.